Hey guys, I thought I would record a video here, just kind of going through the rules. Reading this can be kind of painstaking, and it is pretty short. I believe the rules are 16 pages, but they also have tons of paragraphs and images and stuff like that. So I'm just going to go through the game. If you guys remember, Mage Knight is a miniatures game. It's a 3D free-floating game. These are the different factions that you can choose. Factions are only used in formations, which we'll get to. So if you look at the Mage Knight dial, you have your figure, of course. You have the point total. So the amount of figures you have in your armies when you fight people is based off how many points you all decide on. So you can play a 200-point game, and then all of your figures have to add up to be equal to or under that point total. The average point total is 200. So if you had, let's say, 10 pieces that were 20 points each, you could play all of them in your army. Every figure, they use an algorithm to determine the figure point value. The higher the point value, the more powerful the figure, and things like that. The faction symbol is right here. This is the rear arc, so this is considered the weak spot for the figure, and then this is the character name, which is kind of cool. And this is the front arc, and this is where the character can make attacks from. So can they make attacks if a figure is over here and they're based by another figure, or they're fighting another swordsman? If their arc isn't touching, then they can't hit them. Collector number, absolutely useless. And then this is the stat slot. So this is speed, so how many inches can they move. This is attack, their attack value. This is defense. So when you play, you roll 2 dice, you add your attack value to your dice roll, and then you measure that against their defense. And I believe if it's over the defense value, then you deal your damage, and this is the damage. And if you remember, each of these slots can have colors, and that corresponds to different abilities, which I will go through after I go through the rules. And this is where the game really has its Magic the Gathering-like feel, like First Strike or Quickness or things like that has that ability there. And it's pretty much the figure itself. So you have the point value, the stars are just the rarity, doesn't matter, the faction symbol, which we'll get to later, and then the stats. And this is also their range here, so how many inches can they fire, and then how many arrows is how many targets they can hit. So the combat dial turns clockwise, and you turn it counterclockwise to heal. That's pretty much it. Combat values, which they got to, speed, attack, defense, damage, range. And those are all very straightforward. How many inches can you move? What's your attack value? What's your defense value? Kind of like almost attack and toughness in Magic, very similar. Range is how far can you shoot someone if you're a ranged figure, and then damage, how much damage do you do? Mounted warriors, I would... they have a peanut symbol. I would say for the first couple games we play, we don't play with mounted figures because they're just a little bit more complicated, and they have a little bit of extra rules added to them. I only have a few of them, but they can add a new dynamic to the game, and some of them are very cool, but I would just say don't play with them for the first couple games, which I'm not even going to get to here. Game items. So what do you need? You need 2 6-sided dice, and you need a few tokens to measure how many actions each figure has taken per turn. That's pretty much it. Getting started, you build your army. Like I said, you build an army on 100 points or 200 points or 300 points, and you all build your army ad hoc. And then you can see here they picked an army. This is a 200-point army, and if you add up the totals, it's 98 points. So they're under 100. You have to be equal or under 100, and so they can play these 5 figures in a 100-point game. There's a couple ways to play to determine who wins. You can set a timer, and whoever has the most points, so every time you eliminate a figure, the opposing team marks how many points they got, kind of like Uno, right? And at the end of the time period, whoever has eliminated the most points wins, or you could play elimination where whoever eliminates the most figures, or whoever completely eradicates the other army wins. There's that. So setting the scene. What's really cool about Mage Knight is you can set up terrain. So you can set up like houses and stuff like that. That's considered blocking terrain. So you can't move through it. You can't fire arrows through it. You can set up water. There's some figures that can swim in water. And then there's something called Hindering Terrain. So there's blocking terrain, there's water, and then there's hindering terrain. Hindering terrain is almost like a dense forest where you can move through it, and some figures have a special ability where when they're in the terrain, they're kind of like stealth mode, and they can't be targeted by ranged. And Hindering Terrain also has some abilities where if you're just a normal figure, you don't have a special ability, and you enter it. So let's say that this is Hindering Terrain. If you have, let's say that this line here is 10 inches and you can move 20 inches, well, if you have to pass through the terrain, whenever you enter and leave terrain, your movement stops. So it's almost like you get tired, right? You get exhausted. And that kind of adds an element where some figures can fly right over it, and then some figures have to be stuck because they're big and clunky trolls. It's kind of the idea there. But then those figures also have higher stats, so the game is very balanced in that way. How to play? It's very simple on how to play. Whoever goes first, I don't know how you can determine that. Flip a coin, roll dice, whatever. So if you are playing a 200, for every 100 points you have, you get 1 action per turn. So in a game of 200 points, which is the average game, you get 2 actions per turn. 300 points is 3 actions per turn, and so on. And then right here is a list of the actions you can take. You can move your figure, you can perform a ranged combat action, and you can perform a close combat action, which is like a swordsman, and then you can give a figure a pass. Let's say there's a guy named, let's just say I have a archer, and I decide to shoot Blake's figure. I would give him a ranged combat action, and then I would roll my dice, and then we would do all the damage, and then I would take another figure and I want to move him for a turn. Roll back to my next turn. If I decide to make my archer shoot another arrow, I can do so, or I can give him a pass. So a pass is kind of like a rest. When an archer figure, when any figure takes an action and then another action, it's called pushing, and they take an automatic click of damage. It's kind of like exerting themselves. Like in Magic, there's that ability called Exert where you can't untap for a turn. In the same way, if you exert a figure, they do take damage. Very similar to like the exerting ability in Magic where you can't untap for a turn because they're tired. Same thing in Magic where people need to take rest in order to move again without taking an extra click of damage. So important game concept, base contact. Several rules refer to base contact. A figure is in base contact with another figure if their bases are touching. So let's say I'm a swordsman. The only way I can actually perform a close combat sword swing is if I'm actually in base contact with an opposing figure. Friendly and opposing figures. Friendly figures are warriors that you control in game. Opposing figures are opponents. Pretty obvious. Marking figures with actions. There's an image here. If you give an action other than pass to one of your warriors, mark him with an action token, such as a coin or bead. This token will remind all players which figures have taken actions. At the end of your turn, remove all tokens from your figures not given an action this turn. So wait, that doesn't make any sense. Okay, cool. So let's say you decide to do the pushing, which I talked about. So this steam golem, he attacks you with an arrow, or he blasts you with steam, and then the next turn he blasts you with steam again. On your third turn, you actually can't. You cannot give any figure in the game 3 consecutive actions. So right here, if you give an action other than pass to the same warrior on 2 consecutive turns, that warrior takes 1 click of damage after he resolves his current action. This is called pushing. The damage represents the fatigue caused by taking actions back to back. You may not give any warrior an action other than pass on 3 consecutive turns. Hint, the tokens that you use to mark your warriors remind you which figures could take the pushing penalty. If you're pushing a warrior, put a second token on him and leave both until your next turn. On that turn, the 2 tokens will remind you that you can't give the warrior any other action than passed. At the end of the turn, remove both tokens. So anytime you give a figure a pass action, you remove all of the tokens, whether it's 2 or 1, which is nice because some people think that if you push a figure, you have to give them 2 passes. It's not the case at all. You get to take everything off. So this warrior was moved on 2 of his owning player's consecutive turns, is pushed and given its 2nd token. After pushing action is resolved, the player must give it a click of damage. And nothing can prevent pushing damage in the game. Measurements. When measuring distances for setup, movement, and range combat, always measure to and from the center of a figure's base. Many bases show a center dot as a measurement reference. We're going to completely ignore that because I have found this article that uses hex maps, and I actually have a hex map, and we're actually going to use these rules to play. It makes the game much, much, much better. Special abilities. These are colored squares on each figure's combat dial. These colored squares are associated with areas of the stat slot and represent special abilities that your warrior possesses. Special abilities come and go as your warrior takes clicks of damage and healing. You will find descriptions of all the special abilities on this card. So I will send this to you guys and I will go through it at the end of this video. All special abilities are in effect as long as they appear in the stat slot. If a special ability is described as optional, it is assumed that to be in effect unless it is canceled. The owning player may cancel the effect at any time. That's kind of stupid. That's for tournament play. We're going to be casual, so we're not going to be like, oh, you cheated. Movement. This is totally unrelated because this is using a ruler. We're going to be using a hex map, so we can ignore this entire section. Breaking away. If you give a move action to a warrior that is in base contact, so touching with an opposing figure, that warrior must attempt to break away. So let's say I come in and attack Blake's guy, or I come in and I move in to hit Blake's guy. Blake, on his turn, can choose to run away. So you roll 1 6-sided dice. If you roll 1, 2, or 3, the warrior fails. It may not change his position on the battlefield, though you can rotate him to a new facing. So that's called spinning. If you roll a 4, 5, or 6, you can move away and use your speed value however you want and reposition him anywhere as described. A mounted warrior only fails to break away. So a warrior on like a horse that I mentioned in the beginning only fails to break away from opposing figures on a roll of 1 because he's on a horse. If he does break away, he actually does 1 click of shake off damage on each of those figures. So anyone who's in base contact with him, that's an opposing figure, if he runs away, they take a click of damage from shake off because the horse kind of kicks them, And that's kind of cool. That's why modern figures are interesting, but they're also have these extra rules that kind of add a little bit of complexity to the game. I would say let's stay away from them for the first couple games. A warrior who is given a move action to activate a special ability where the ability states but do not move him does not make a breakaway roll. So basically, let's say you just, let's just not. This is pretty obvious. It's for cheaters. So if you use a special ability that says it's a move type action, it doesn't mean you get to break away and do the ability. You pick the ability or you move. Pretty obvious. Free spin. If your warrior's movement brings him into base contact with 1 or more opposing figures, those opposing figures immediately have the option to spin in place to bring any portion of their front arcs into contact with your moving warrior. These spins, called the free spins, do not cost your opponent any actions, nor do they ever cause pushing. They have example here, but basically this prevents the game from being god-awfully slow. So like let's say Blake is facing north and I come in from the south and I base his guy. That means on his next turn, he would have to spend one of his actions, which you only get 2 per turn, to spin his guy. That's it. But this prevents that from happening where if I come into base contact, you get a free spin. There is one ability in the game. It's called Sneak Attack. And whenever you go into base contact with the rear arc of a figure, they do not get a free spin. And in my opinion, Sneak Attack is one of the most overpowered abilities in the game, and we'll get to that. A moved warrior. A warrior is considered to have moved if his center dot changes position on the battlefield, or his facing is changed other than a free spin. Obvious. So a lot of this stuff is pretty obvious. Range combat and close combat, those are the 2 types of combat in the game. Rolling 2 and 12. So if you roll 2, that's a critical miss. You automatically miss, even if your attack stat will actually hit. Let's say you have 10 attack and you roll a 1 and a 1, so 2. and your opponent's defense value is 9, well, of course you would automatically hit it, but it's a critical miss. So you miss automatically, and you actually take one automatic damage. If you roll a 12, it's a critical hit. No matter what, you automatically hit. Let's say you have 5 attack and your opponent has 30 defense. You'll never hit them. But there's always hope in this game. Even though if your figure is damaged and he's weak, you could still have a critical hit and still do damage and make an automatic hit. And you get an extra click of damage. In my opinion, the dice roll here is equivalent to drawing cards in Magic. This is the luck factor to the game. Magic, there is luck. You draw 7. If you draw bad, you have to mulligan. Okay, you have to draw again, you have to mulligan. And then let's say you draw a land, and get flooded. You lose. It's over. Or you could draw the perfect sequence of cards. This is the luck element in the game, and I think it's great that they added a critical miss and a critical hit because it adds a little bit of more spice to the game. And I'm sure we could also invent our own rules, but this seems pretty fair. You cannot target a friendly warrior with an attack. It's pretty obvious, but you can heal them. So there's healing, and there's magic levitation. So it's kind of cool. There's other ways to heal your figures, and we'll get to that in the special abilities. Eliminating, as soon as 3 skulls are appeared in the stat slot, the warrior is eliminated and removed from the battlefield. So sequence of attack, you have to give an action to one of your figures, ranged or close, declare the target or targets, declare a capture attempt. Capturing is something we'll get to in a little bit. Place an action token on each warrior if contributing to the attack. We'll get to that as well. The attacking player chooses which of his optional special abilities turn on or off. The defending does as well. Roll the attack dice and determine the success of the attack. By the way, you almost never, ever want to turn off your special abilities. This is just there. You almost never want to do it. Roll the attack dice and determine the success of the attack. Calculate the damage inflicted. Done. Apply effects generated by damage, vampirism. It's kind of cool. Apply pushing damage to the attackers if applicable. So notice that you take pushing damage after everything is said and done. This does matter because if you take a click of pushing damage before, your stats would go down. It's after, which is nice. Ranged combat. So this is a massive wall of text. Basically, it's your ranged combat guy has an arc. This demonstrates who is visible inside of his arc. And so this is his arc here, but he's actually blocked by terrain here, so you can't shoot through terrain. And then the figure's base, so let's say there's a figure here. Let's say this is a friendly figure. You actually cannot shoot through your guys. And the way they measure that is the figure's circle dial. So you can't shoot him. So essentially his line of sight is just that thin thing. So what's nice about that is you can actually move your figures in the way of other figures on purpose to make kind of like as a self-sacrificial, way for them to prevent them from losing. Some figures have multiple range attacks. One thing to note about that, all the same rules apply to range up here. They have to be within your arc. And you have roll dice, target's defense value with your attack value with the dice roll. Is it above? Blah, blah, blah. I just realized if the result is equal to or greater than the target's defense value. So let's say I have 10 attack and you have 15 defense and I roll a 5 on my dice. If it's equal to your defense, I still hit. So it's equal to or greater. So back to this, if you have 2 targets, your damage is reduced to 1. So that's balancing in the game. So some figures have 4 targets, but their damage value is 4. That would be insane. If they could target 4 figures and do 12 damage in 1 turn, I would never play this game. But what they've done is if you have a single target, you do your damage, but if you have multiple targets, it is reduced down to 1 damage. There are special abilities like Magic Enhancement. Magic Enhancement improves your range attacks by 1 damage. So there are figures they're almost like support figures, and if they're in base contact with a range figure, they kind of give them a magic ability, and then it gives their range damage and extra damage. So let's say you could target 4 people, you would only do 1 damage to each of them, but if you have a magic enhancement, it does 2 damage to each of them. And you can see how that strategy is very powerful because you're doing 8 damage with 1 attack. That's insane. So this is a special ability called Flame Lightning. We'll get to that in a little bit. Whenever a ranged combat action is used to affect more than one target, the damage of the attack is reduced to 1. So that's just the way it is. It's to balance because range is obviously very powerful. Close combat. The front arc of your warrior must be in base contact with the target figure before you can give your warrior a close combat. The only thing you need to know here is you need to add 1 to your dice roll if a warrior is in contact with the rear arc. And that's very important because that 1 could make or break the attack hitting or missing. These are all, I'll get to all that in a second. Same idea though, you roll your dice, you add it to your attack value. If it's equal to or greater than their defense, then you hit. Damage, same thing. Okay, you do 4 damage, then you do 4 damage. Capturing, so this is the weirdest thing in the game. It's called capturing. When you're making a close combat action, you may choose to capture an opposing target figure instead of damaging it. You must declare a capture attempt before rolling the close combat dice. The defense value of the target is increased by 2. If you hit, the target becomes captured, but it does not damage it. The capture figure is called a captive. A captive cannot be given an action and all of its special abilities are ignored. While a figure is a captive, it does not count as a friendly or opposing figure to any player. Captives are ignored for purposes of breaking away, but a controlling warrior may never voluntarily break base contact with his captive. So it's like taking a prisoner. A warrior may have only 1 captive under his control. Show this by keeping the 2 figures in base contact at all times. No warrior, friendly or opposing, may target a captive for any purpose. A captive never takes damage from any source, even from Shockwave or Flame Lightning attacks, which is a special ability. The captive always moves with its controlling warrior, using the lower of their 2 speed values. The controlling warriors get to use his speed ability, if any, for both figures. The controlling always determines the captive's facing location. The captive position and facing may be changed when the controlling warrior moves. No player may place a controlling warrior in the location when his captive may not be placed. This is so complicated. I'll have to explain this in person. Formations, this is the last thing on the document here. All members of formation must be from the same faction. So in the beginning, I talked about these factions, and they're right here. They all have to be of the same faction. So it's like a D&D thing. If 3, 4, or 5 of your warriors are grouped together so that one is touching the base of at least one other warrior, you may call this group a movement formation. Only a warrior eligible to receive a move action may be a member of a movement formation. When you give a move action to just one of these warriors, all of the warriors in the movement formation may move as part of that same action. So it's a way to move multiple figures by only using one of your actions for the turn. Remember, you only get 2 actions in a 200-point game. So this is a way to really push your army up. The speed of each figure in the movement formation is reduced to the speed of the slowest figure. Makes sense? Move all figures in the formation normally, one at a time. The action ends when the member of the formation has moved. During the action, the warriors must be moved to positions on the battlefield so that at the end of the action, each member is once again in base contact with at least one other warrior from the formation. The formation cannot be split into 2 groups at the end. Even though only one warrior in the formation is given the move action, each member of the formation is marked with an action token. So all of your guys do get tired at the same level. Using a movement formation may cause some figures to be pushed while others are not. That's fine. If any figure in a movement formation fails a breaking away roll, the figure may not move, though it can still rotate to face a new direction. Other figures in the formation can move normally, but at the end of the action, each warrior's base must still be touching the base of another warrior in the formation. This is taking a lot longer than I thought. I'm sorry, guys. Movement formations are good because one move action allows you to move several warriors instead of just one. Pretty obvious. Combat formations. There's 2 types. There is range and there's close. So let's say you have a group of guys and they all are ranged. They're all ranged guys. So let's say you have 3 gunners. Right here, boom, 3 guys. They all must have a line of fire, and they must be a clear line of fire. And what it does is, let's say you want this ranger to shoot this steam golem. These two ranged figures they're not shooting at him, but they're giving him a boost. And so each additional warrior in the ranged combat formation adds 2 to the attack dice roll. There is no damage bonus. It doesn't give you more damage, but allows some of your figures who are weakened or maybe have a lower attack value to hit the more powerful figures. It's almost like they're helping him fire the arrow. Then it doesn't do any other damage, but it makes it more accurate. That's it. The thing is, though, only this guy receives a token. These two do not receive a token, so they can move, they can fire on their next turn, which is really cool. So in this instance here, the ranger is the primary attacker, so this dude right here in the middle, but you add +4 because these two are helping fire the steam golem. In the same way, let's say this is the bad guy, these are your 2 guys, and let's say this one is attacking him. Because he is also facing him, you add +1 to your dice roll. Additionally, this guy is also touching the rear arc of this guy, so you add +1 here for your friend helping you, and you add +1 for kind of getting up behind him in his rear arc. So you get +2. There is no damage bonus as well. Terrain, this is basically what I explained in the beginning. There's hindering terrain, there's blocking terrain, there's elevated terrain. It all functions just as you think it would. Elevated terrain means you can fire down on people from a cliff and things like that. You can use books or something to create like stepping stones and cool stuff like that. All figures must stop as soon as they move up into elevated, clear, or hindering terrain, or down out of it. So if you go into that or out of it, you have to stop. Kind of like getting tired. Height advantage: when a fighter who is not elevated, it makes a ranged combat attack against an elevated target, the defense of that target is increased by 1. This is called the height advantage. A target figure might gain the benefit of the height advantage modifier and the hindering terrain modifier at the same time. This would increase its defense by 2. I forgot to mention, if you're in hindering terrain and somebody fires an arrow at you, you get an additional defense because you're kind of in the trees, right? You can dodge. Additionally, in close combat, if you're elevated and somebody's trying to swing a sword at you, you have higher defense. You get 1 extra defense. For all sake of it, I would say let's not play with elevated terrain for the first couple. It just seems like a little crazy. Special terrain, we don't need to talk about this. Ending the game, we already talked about that. So that's the rules. That's pretty much it. A high level, there's attacking, there's formations, there's movement, and then there's tokens, and then there's special abilities. That's pretty much it. It's pretty easy. So in terms of the special abilities, I would highly read through this document. Treat these abilities like abilities in Magic, like haste or first strike or double strike or flying. So defense abilities, these have to deal with defense things. So battle armor, this gives you +2 defense against range attacks. Pole arm, whenever you move into base contact with a figure, they take an automatic click of damage. Magic immunity, you are immune to any ability that has magic in its name. Toughness, this toughness reduces all damage you receive by 1 click. Even polearm, even venom, or magic retaliation, toughness does not reduce pushing or critical miss damage. That's really important. Defend, this warrior can share his defense value with everyone that's in base contact with them. That's really cool. Regeneration, this warrior can heal 0 to 4 clicks. You roll dice, and you subtract 2 from your dice roll. So if you roll a 6, you heal 4. You roll 2, you heal 0. Invulnerability, this is a very powerful ability. It reduces all damage by 2. It's kind of insane. Dodge, this is also a very, very powerful ability. Whenever anybody makes an attack on you and they succeed, you roll a 6-sided die. On a 4, 5, or 6, they actually miss the attack after they successfully hit it. On a 1, 2, or 3, they still hit. So this makes every attack they hit 50-50. Very OP ability. Magic Retaliation, anybody that hits you, they automatically take a damage. Limited Invisibility, this warrior may not be the target of a ranged combat action. Very powerful. This is probably the best anti-range ability in the game. And remember, you have this ability if that color and shape appears on your defense stat, which is kind of an ingenious way of displaying this. So speed, charge, this warrior can move and then automatically make a close combat action in the same attack, which is very cool. So you can move your guy and swing your sword in the same move. Quickness, this warrior can move without being given an action. So let's say you have 2 actions per turn. You can move this guy and it doesn't take away one of your actions from the turn, but he still gets a token for being tired. But it allows you to kind of get a free action. Very powerful ability. Magic Levitation. If a figure that has Magic Levitation is in base contact with another figure, they can move any figure up to 10 inches. Very cool. Friendly or not. Very powerful ability. Flight. This warrior can ignore all terrain and figure bases while moving. That's really cool. So you can just freaking fly around the map. Aquatic. This warrior is not affected by water. Honestly, those figures suck. Stealth. Hindering Terrain blocks line of fire. So if you're in the grass and you have this stealth ability, you cannot be shot by arrows or anything. Bound, this is the same thing as charge. You can move and then make a ranged combat action. So you kind of jump and then, kind of like Legolas, you jump and fire your arrow. Forced to March, this warrior can share his speed value with everyone in his movement formation. It's an okay ability. Nimble, this warrior can change his facing without being given an action. So he can change whenever he wants for free. Ram, this warrior delivers a click of damage when he moves into contact with an opposing figure. So you kind of ram into someone. And I believe I said polearm. Whenever anybody moves into you, they take a damage. So I actually said that wrong. Damage abilities. So these appear in your damage stat. Berserk. This warrior cannot make ranged combat attacks. So they kind of go crazy. Magic Enhancement. This improves the damage delivered by friendly ranged combat attacks if you're in base contact. Battle Fury, this warrior cannot be captured. That's good. Remember the whole captive thing. Demoralize, this warrior can only be given a move or pass action. This usually appears on the last click of a lot of figures. They kind of get beat up so bad. Necromancy, I'm not going to go through that ability because I'll explain that in person. I doubt you guys will play with figures that have that on it. Command, this warrior may add an action to your turn. So you roll a dice at the beginning of your turn for free, and on a result of 6, you get a free extra action on your turn, which is awesome. Pierce, this warrior's ranged combat attacks ignore battle armor, toughness, and invulnerability. That's freaking powerful. Magic Freeze, this warrior may use a ranged combat attack to add a token to a target figure. So that's kind of cool. So let's say I want your guys as general. He's already moved for the turn. I can give him a Magic Freeze so that he can't move again. Magic Confusion, this warrior may make a ranged combat attack to move an opposing figure. So kind of confuse your opponent and you can fling them across the map. The attack special abilities, so healing. Healing, there's magic healing and there's healing. So healing is when you're in base contact with one of your friendlies. You roll a 6-sided die and they heal that much. So keep in mind though, you do have to roll enough to beat their defense. We can explain that in the future. Weapon Master, this warrior can use a close combat action to deliver 1 to 6 clicks of damage. So after you attack someone, you roll a 6-sided die and then you inflict 1 to 6 damage depending on what the dice says. Magic Blast, it's the same thing as Weapon Master, but it's a ranged attack instead. Flame Lightning, this warrior's ranged combat attack can affect all figures in base contact with the target. So let's say I have a bunch of orcs in a movement formation and Blake shoots me with Flame Lightning and he hits me. All of the figures in that formation get shocked for 1 damage. Shockwave, this warrior's ranged combat attack can affect every figure within half its range value. it only does 1 damage as well. So these both reduce your damage to 1. Vampirism, this warrior can heal himself with a successful close combat attack. So you just heal 1 click of damage. Magic healing is the same as healing, but it's a ranged version, so it's better. Venom, this warrior can automatically damage an opposing figure in base contact at the beginning of your turn. It's a pretty good ability. Sneak attack, in my opinion, most powerful ability in the game. This warrior can deliver double damage with a close combat attack to the target's rear arc. When this warrior is given a move action and is in base contact with an opposing figure at the end of that movement, the opposing figure does not get a free spin. When this warrior is given a close combat action, he is in base contact with the rear arc of the target figure, double his damage value. That's insane. Sweep. This warrior can hit every opposing figure in the front arc contact with a close combat action. That's also very powerful. So let's say you're hoarding me with a bunch of guys. I have a big axe. I can sweep everyone in my front arc. So that's pretty good. So that's pretty much the game. And then this is going to take some memorization because there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's 40 abilities in the game. But keep in mind that, there's 36. But there's 39. Keep in mind that no new abilities are coming out. So once you memorize these, you pretty much are done memorizing them. And then also, you don't have to memorize them. You can reference this card, and I would suggest using a couple figures and playing the same game a couple times to kind of memorize your figures with what they have. There's a really cool site called Mage Knight. You can look up any figure. They have a rules book. It's mageknight.net. Some guy made it. They have a dial stat, so you can look up any figure in the game. They have rules books. That's where I got all this stuff. It's pretty cool. You don't need to use that if you don't want to. And then so the way we can play this game without using a ruler is called the Hex Map Variant. Keeps Mage Knight simple. This was like published years ago. Pretty cool, but when was it published? Wow, dude, this is so old. Look how old this is. From the early 2000s. So essentially what you do is, because hexes are not the same as circles, because they're on circles, you basically treat like a 90-degree arc would be the front 2 hexes, and then a 90-degree back arc would be the back 2 hexes. So every figure either has a 90-degree or a 180-degree arc. And so what you can do here is, like right here, this represents 180 degrees, so half of the hex. And then that's how you make ranged and close combat attacks, is you use the hexes. And then if we all agree on this, it makes the game freaking so easy. And all of the abilities don't have an issue with this. So it makes the game really, really fun by using the hexes and stuff like that. So let me know what you guys think. Pretty much what we can do is, if we get together, Blake or Ben, we can learn how to play. And I suggest we both use really weak figures and really low, where we play like a 100-point game, and that's how we can learn how to play. And then using this hex map, it should be pretty easy. So the biggest thing is not actually the rules of the game. I mean, it's pretty easy. You roll some dice, you move your guys. It's the special abilities, and really understanding these is really important. So let me know what you guys think.